Baseball. Something called a utility man in baseball. Anybody know what that is? Anybody with Rick Cerrone cannot answer. Anybody know what that is? Utility man, that's somebody who does a little bit of everything. He does it well. He does it when it needs to be done. He does it basically without asking. He is there. He does a little bit of everything on the team. And that pretty much describes Rick Cerrone. Here's a gentleman, a 1976 NIU alumnus, and he's enjoyed a long and successful career around Major League Baseball. He developed Baseball Magazine shortly after graduating from NIU, and eventually became the senior director of media relations for the New York Yankees, working for that organization until, 2006? During which time they won something like 4 World Series titles. You know, back in the day before texting, when we did a radio broadcast, we used to pop something on email. And whoever's out there, we gave them an email address to send us your thoughts and comments. And all of a sudden, we're doing the game one day in DeKalb, I think it was against Central Michigan, and up pops an email from Rick Cerrone. Hey, we're listening at Fenway Park in Boston. Now, the Yankees are playing the Red Sox, and the director of media relations is listening to NIU football. You gotta love that. I don't know if George Steinbrenner would have liked it, but you've gotta love it, without question. Here's a gentleman who's now the editor-in-chief of Baseball Digest magazine. He's done that since back in 2018, and he continues to support NIU in so many different ways it's impossible to count. Had a great hand in the celebration for Husky Stadium to celebrate the 50th anniversary. Those downtown window graphics you see in DeKalb as you go through sometimes. Cerrone, no question about that. Those conference championship flags in the end zone, including that 63-footer for the national champions. Rick Cerrone, the Jim Bradley display, if you've never seen it in the Convocation Center, you need to do that. South Lobby, Rick Cerrone. And something close to my heart, he restored the National World War II Memorial as it pertained to NIU students, which you'll find at the Convocation Center as well. Matter of fact, this guy, he broadcast the first ever Mid-American Conference football game against Western Michigan on the old student station, WKDI, back in 1975. He beat me by something like 5 years. To say the very least, Rick Cerrone is our utility man, and to say the least, his fingerprints are everywhere at Northern Illinois University and DeKalb, including tonight. They are in the NIU Husky Athletic Hall of Fame. Rick Cerrone, ladies and gentlemen.
Can I get a minute while I go through what Bill already took out of my speech? Wow. Thank you, everyone. Sean Frazier, President Freeman, friends, family, coaches, student athletes, my baseball players over there. You know, when I arrived, I was reminded watching the introduction video by Bob Costas that when I arrived at NIU 50 years ago last month, September 9th of 1972, with my one suitcase, the football team was not there to help me move into the dorm. The marching band wasn't there. I don't think we had a marching band at the time, but we didn't have an NIU Athletics Hall of Fame because Bob Costas and Bill told you that didn't come until 1978, and it wouldn't have been something that I would have ever aspired to be a part of if there was one in 1972, but there was not. What there was here at the time that I was here, at the time that I was at this institution that I chose to help me achieve my goal, which at the time was to someday be the public relations director of the New York Yankees, there were living, breathing, working future Hall of Fame members. 2 of the 3 gentlemen that Bob Costas mentioned, Bob Brigham and Bud Nangle, were here and encouraged me and guided me. There was also our head football coach, a Hall of Famer, Jerry Ippoliti, the head basketball coach, Tom Jorgensen, his assistant, Dr. Emery Luck, Dr. Emery Luck's assistant, the great Walt Owens, was here, and they encouraged me. Mike Korsick was here. I knew Mike back when I did that first football game in the Mid-American Conference with my broadcast partner, Jim Schmidt, not on the student station, but on the whole network. And when I thought tonight that I actually did a football game before Bill Baker, and I said to myself, God, you are old. Wow. But they were here, and they encouraged me. Sometimes they criticized me, but I always believed that they cared about me. There were others that were not in the Hall of Fame, but they're in my Hall of Fame. There was the star advisor, Jerry Thompson. I can't thank him enough. He's since passed away. There was the man that called me up one day and said, you need to come and look at this university. A man named Stanley Shallett, who was the sports editor of the DeKalb Daily Chronicle, who I had worked for back in New York when I was in high school. And there was the first person I met when I came out here to meet Stanley, Roger Farrell, who's here tonight, sports writer and future sports editor for the Daily Chronicle. It was Chuck Shriver at the Chicago Cubs and later the White Sox, this is the Chicago Cubs taking the time to host a student sports editors seminar at Wrigley Field when the Cubs, by the way, are playing the Cincinnati Reds with Pete Rose and Johnny Bench. Now, that's a story for another day, but I went to that seminar at Wrigley Field with my colleague at the Star, the great Phil Cadner. I don't remember anything about the seminar itself, but I remember that experience and some things that happened to me at that day really did change my life. I learned that day that if you take the time to make someone's day, you just might change their life. The other thing that there wasn't at NIU when I got here in 1972 was any friends. I didn't know anybody when I arrived with that suitcase. And that would change pretty quickly. I was sitting in my room after I got here at 9 o'clock on a Saturday night. NIU had just beaten Illinois State that afternoon in the opening football game. And I'm sitting on my bed in my dorm room. Don't know a soul. And then I hear a ruckus in the hallway, and I open the door, and there's a beautiful young woman picking up a Frisbee. And she says, come on out and play, we're playing Frisbee. Well, the hall was 3 feet wide, so this was, we had no regard for public property or anything. But so next thing I know, we're in the room of a guy down the hall, a bunch of people, and they're saying we're having breakfast the next morning at the Dill Pickle. Why don't you join us? And I go do that. And I asked the young lady out to go bowling, and I have a date. Now that afternoon, I made the weekly call home to your parents, the $7 2-minute call. And my mother said to me on the phone, she said, now look, don't just be sitting in your room there. You're not going to meet anybody sitting in your room. I'm like, Mom, that's not true. I just did. But I would meet a lot of people that week, that day. I went to a concert here the next week to see Blood, Sweat, and Tears. The ticket said festival seating. I had no idea what that was. But at NIU, apparently, in this ballroom, it means we have no chairs. Just sit on the floor. So I learned festival seating. But I made a lot of friends. And a lot of them are friends to this day. There was Larry and Becky, there was Marcia, there was Greg, and there was Graham, there was Annie and John, Jan, Peggy, Hamer, Tom, my broadcast partner, Jim Schmid. These are the people that helped get me through that experience of being so far away from home for the first time. And everybody that I've mentioned tonight that's still with us, and some are sadly gone, it was 50 years ago, but everybody I've mentioned tonight that's still with us is here tonight, which is kind of a testament to the relationship we built. In closing, people often ask me, especially students, and when I mention students, I want to thank the Northern Star staff for being here. I want to thank the baseball players, the gymnasts for being here, the other sports. That means the world to me. But people, especially students, have asked me recently, maybe because I'm getting old, they say, do you feel like you've had a successful career? And I'm like, well, yeah, I'd have to say yes because it checked all the boxes. In fact, it checked boxes that I didn't even have. I mean, I basically had one box. I wanted to be the PR director of the New York Yankees. Okay, we checked that box. But I wasn't thinking I want to get 4 world championship rings. I'd like to meet 2 of the Beatles and Springsteen and Tony Bennett. You know, I didn't have things that I was able to do. I did not have boxes for. I didn't have a box that said, I'd like to meet a beautiful young woman through my job that I get from this education, and she'll give up her career in baseball so that you can follow your dream. But my wife Karen did that, and I thank you. I didn't think that that would get me a son who, after initially having no interest in sports whatsoever, became like he could have hosted a radio talk show at 10 years old. And he decided to follow in my footsteps, and now he is having the start of a great career in the National Hockey League with the Florida Panthers. And I'm very proud of you, Corey, because I once thought about, in the 11 years I was doing that PR job with the New York Yankees, he went from 2 years old to 13, and I realized at the end of it that I had spent 3.5 years, if you add up all the days, out of state. So 3.5 years of my son's life from age 2.5 to 13, I was not around. As Corey would tell the minister on Sunday, my dad's on vacation. So thank you, Corey, for being the person you are. I continue to be proud of you every day. And I never would have thought that I would get back to this university working as a consultant for 6 years on some of those projects that Bill was talking about that were an honor to do. For that, I thank Jeff Comfer and Sean Frazier. I got to work, and also Mike Malone and Joe Matty, and I got to work with them. And these past few years, getting to work with Brad Hoy has been a tremendous joy. He is like Mr. NIU, and he was downtown yesterday with his red jacket, and I'm like, what's better than that? But I will just close by saying, you know, back in 1976, I didn't attend our graduation of my class because I had to take 6 credits in the summer of 1976 to graduate. So I just didn't feel right about graduating with those students at the football stadium in May. I also had an offer to drive with some friends down to Disney World, so I opted to do that. So I never really graduated, so to me, this is my graduation. I think it's kind of with honors, so I could not be happier, and I could not love NIU more, so go Huskies, beat Toledo. Thank you.